Welcome, friends, to the Abyss, a deeper dive into Harvest's Omen system, and with hope, it shall grant you the basic rules alongside a variety of options, teaching you all there is to know about the game systems, mechanics, while also providing a little bit about the world. This video's goal is to cover the basics of play, specifically dice, and how to use them. So without further ado, let's roll some. Within Harvest, both the player and the Arbiter will roll dice. Most often this is in response to an action, whether trying to flay the minds of weaker foes with fey hexes, avoid crumbling rubble from above, cut down foes with swift strikes, or steal your concentration during moments of intensity. You may have to roll some polyhedral dice, the game's effective way of determining chance. For those of you who have played other games such as D&D, Pathfinder, or other similar TTRPGs, you shall be familiar with these. The D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, and D20. Each die represents chance. The D before the number represents the dice, while the following number represents the number of sides. Very often you may see this type of notation, where there is a number before the dice, a 1d4. In this case, the integer before the four-sided dice represents the number of dice rolled. So very simply, 1d4 means one four-sided die. Following this, a 5d20 would mean that there are 5 20-sided dice. At times, you deal with larger numbers. That's where some of these dice have multiple functions. The d10 can be used to represent 100. In this case, it is known as a percentile die. Percentiles are often used for roll tables, randomized loot, and effective charts to shake up play. These allow the player to manifest numbers ranging in between 1 and 100 by rolling 2 10-sided dice, numbered from 0 to 9. Before you roll, you have one die represent a factor of 10, and the other accounting for single digits. For example, if you roll 2 dice and deem the one on the left to represent your tens and the ones on the right to represent your single digits, the left die might roll an 8 and the other might roll a 2. The result would be 82. But if you roll 2 zeros, that represents 100. Some dice are built to factor tens in, such as this one. If you replace both dice with these, you can scale your results between 1 and 1000, allowing you to reach higher randomization. Harvest uses all of these, but most predominantly contest dice, represented by a 4d4. This dice will be your bread and butter, applying to all things. When a roll is deemed necessary due to an event in the game, a contest is struck. This is often communicated to the player by the Arbiter, and it is the player's challenge to overcome the contest by rolling their contest dice. If no specific CD, known as a contest difficulty, is called, the contest shall be deemed a normal contest, which will always have a CD, contest difficulty, of 2. To win a contest, you simply must have more evens than odds. Count your evens, and then add them together to gain a result to combat your CD. In this case, you must beat a 2 with your 4 contest dice, in order to succeed in your action. If you are below the target, you fail the contest, and receive a poor outcome. Now, upon rolling all evens with your contest die, you receive a critical success, granting you the highest realistic outcome within a given situation, while also granting full damage and a ×2 multiplier to your damaging action, exploding fourth damage. Rolling all negatives, however, with your contest die, grants a critical failure, granting a disastrous outcome. Is that the Arbiter's description how this manifests? From a free attack by an enemy, you dropping your weapon, or even falling prone. Now, if you roll all 4s on your dice, this is known as an improbable success. The chances to get it are low, but if you do, there's a massive payoff. Succeeding in an improbable success will allow the most magnificent outcome to occur. Alongside this, if a single point of damage leaks through, the enemy that is struck, imbued with this attack, shall instantly die. And lastly, for ties, this is known as a balanced roll. where the player doesn't fail, but doesn't succeed either. Something in between that is at the arbiter's discretion. Lastly, if this is a tie between a player and a creature, then the game's light level is enacted. At the start of the tale, your players would have decided upon a light tale or dark tale. This will be the deciding factor in tiebreakers, allowing your players to succeed or fail based on the active light level of the game. The darker the situation, the darker the outcome. But that is the basics of dice outcomes. Ultimately, the goal is to have more evens than the contest difficulty. Now, let's talk about the other ways you can exploit your dice. Time to bring forth modifiers. Powerful little things. Mainly from your core attributes and aptitudes. When playing Harvest, each Wayfarer shall have access to 8 core stats: Allure, Brawn, Dexterity, Discernment, Intellect, Vigor, Sanity, and Grit. As you build your Wayfarer, through your origins, racial traits, ails, vocations, all of these shall play into your final stats that you have, granting you an amount of points in each respective category. In the end, each attribute category shall have some points invested in it, or it shall remain at 0. For every 2 points within a category, you shall gain a +1 modifier when using this category during a contest involving it, allowing you to boost your chances during specific contests, sometimes almost eliminating failure entirely. An important note, each core attribute has a natural cap of 10, limiting access to points beyond that cap. If any points exceed your cap or modifiers, they shall be acted like a buffer. For example, if your player gets a stat reduction from 10 to 9 but technically has 11 points total, they shall remain at 10, requiring at least a -2 modifier to drop their stat below the cap due to the remaining overflow filtering in. All negative stat reductions accrued this way are non-permanent unless stated otherwise, and are rare, but when they do occur, worry not, they can be removed at places of trade such as the Asylum. As you have seen, each core attribute grants something different. The more points you invest, the quicker, stronger, more resilient, and more efficient you become. In some cases, even allowing a spellcaster to cast spells for free, if not highly reduced costs. But the benefits of these are linked to your accessible modifiers, locking off potential power until you find ways to grow or completely remove your core attributes cap. Thematically and mechanically, this will most often result in your Wayfarer performing heretical and monstrous feats to obtain eldritch and demonic power, allowing you to push past human limits. I will say that reaching 100 in a stat is possible through suffering and trial and tribulation. When a contest is called in any circumstance, it will have a core modifier requirement in the notation before the result is needed. For example, a Sanity or SNT contest, CD2. This asks a creature to overcome a difficulty contest of 2, utilizing their Sanity stat as the main core modifier for the role. Only one core attribute can be used during contests this way, and when it is voiced, it must be met by the same attribute. Some contests may be harder to complete than another contest, requiring higher rolls, a CD5 to even a CD10, something only possible through modifiers obtained from tertiary sources, critical successes, or esoteric uncanny items and blessings. And when that is not enough, you look towards your aptitudes. Very similar to core attributes, but different. Of them, we have Agility, Contrive, Cure, Dirty Trick, Engineering, Feign, Identify, Intimidate, Perception, Politics, Privy, Rally, Sleight of Hand, Survival, Stealth, Weapon Proficiency. All of these are very similar to core attributes. These are skills that can be used to modify contests when applicable. And just like core attributes, these also have a cap of 10, limiting the benefits they provide in the same way. There are two special things about aptitudes. The first is that they grant a +1 modifier to a contest for every 5 points invested, as opposed to core attributes 1 point per 2, often meaning that most people will receive no more than a +2 modifier from each aptitude. But the second thing is that there's no limit to their use. They only need to be applicable, allowing for multiple aptitudes to be used in a single contest. For example, if you're trying to convince a noble to back down with a dark form of diplomacy, the Arbiter may ask you to perform an ALR or DIS contest, allure or discernment, allowing the player to choose what they would like to do. So in other words, a charm versus a wise, subtle tact approach. Both could yield success, but the outcome might be slightly different. You lean into discernment because it's your highest stat, so you must now perform the contest using your contest dice plus your dis modifier, but you plan to leverage your knowledge of the skeletons in this person's closet, threaten to release that information publicly, potentially ruin them financially, and tarnish their status. You bluff about your connections, but you threaten all the same. This stunt you are pulling will allow you to utilize your politics, intimidate, and feign modifiers, potentially adding an additional 1 to 6 modifiers to your contest dice. When adding modifiers to a contest, like in this instance, each modifier counts as an additional +1d4, so you shall be rolling 4d4 from your contest die, plus the number of modifiers you have, and then compare it to the result against the contest difficulty. An important note is that all modifiers can only help you, and cannot count as odd, and shall only count as even if rolled even. Now, for my favorite part about aptitudes, as your players progress, they will begin the game optimized for a particular form of play, but they are not locked in. Through various systems, you can spread your stats out and stretch in other directions, often allowing you to access new weapons, actions, abilities, passives, damage ramps, and other game-scaling factors due to stat alteration, allowing you to change your whole entire form of play. So functionally, any Wayfarer could almost do anything, but the sacrifice needed will be greater the further you are from being naturally optimized for a specific playstyle, the harder and longer it will be to obtain. But those who embrace what they are good at can unlock potent passives early, chiefly charmed proficiency. If you perform a contest and roll 10 dice, your core dice plus 6 modifiers, you will automatically succeed in that contest so long as it at least has one of those modifiers coming from an aptitude, granting the contest charmed proficiency. In other words, if you have your weapon proficiency aptitude given at least one modifier, when you reach 10 dice rolled towards your chance to attack, you will automatically succeed, allowing you to never miss when trying to strike. You must still roll to see if you crit, but while under charm proficiency, you can never fail or critically fail, allowing players to rest assured that they can never waste a turn with their weapon, rewarding them for their investment with a skill. This is a good time to bring up the different types of contests. You know about normal contests. The next is no contest. When a no contest is enacted, you shall automatically succeed with no contest. If something is targeting you, then you shall fail with no contest. These are unavoidable interactions. No contest actions bypass anything that isn't a no contest interaction, like a normal dodge reaction versus a no contest dodge reaction. If two no contest actions are interacting with each other, then the following no contest in the order of operations shall win out. So in this case, if the no contest dodge is made after the no contest strike, then the dodge that is no contest shall win. The next contest is an offensive contest. This contest is for combat. When a creature is attempting to strike another creature, they are targeting the creature's AL, their avoidance level, a separate stat number representing the passive evasiveness of a creature. Offensive contests may even target a core attribute, like poisons or mind-affecting hexes, but the listed target stat will be the CD that the attacker must overcome. Next, defensive contests. When defending, you don't need to do anything. The passive stat of your avoidance level, or the strength of your attributes, will act as your passive protection. When your Wayfarer engages in combat, they passively and defensively try to counter attacks with defensive contests. Some creatures specialize in attacks targeting certain stats. Places like the Apothecary offer vast amounts of drugs, woods, sieves, balsams to ward off and cleanse these types of attacks. The Asylum, with its variety of lobotomies, and the Occultist with its flesh-carved glyphs and cursed relics, also serve to aid against these. And lastly, there are counter-offensive contests. You are able to gain access to special reactions such as parries, counter-strikes, dual stances, and various other actions and passives. These are all known as counter-offensive contests. Unlike other offensive contests, charmed weapon proficiency cannot be used during it. This is a skill versus skill action, where one person meets another's attack, often with risk and reward. When performing a counter contest, you target an attack coming your way and treat it as an offensive contest result. You then roll an offensive contest with your weapon tied to the action, such as a parry or a counter strike, and compare your results to the attacker's. If your result is higher, you succeed, and if not, you fail. Often, failing might grant an enemy an additional attack, if not a stronger one, because you leave yourself exposed. But if you succeed, you can ward off damage almost entirely, find openings for additional attacks, a gamble for sure, though there are many ways to build around dueling. I also want to mention omitted contests. You can choose to voluntarily fail a contest. Sounds odd, but just as in other TTRPGs, sometimes it's more beneficial to receive damage or even allow something to occur. This gives the player a mechanical freedom to do this, either for player versus player interactions or a masochistic vocational damage build. While this system dives deeper into combat and can drastically affect all forms of gameplay, from summons to damage to extra attacks to infinite casting to many other things, I shall save that for a different video entirely. A few more things that could turn the tide in a contest: advantages and disadvantages. When gaining an advantage or disadvantage within the encounter, your contest die shall be affected, resulting in a guaranteed even result of 2, or an odd result of 3. Multiple advantages and disadvantages can be acquired, further increasing your chances of critical failure or success. Advantages and disadvantages can be granted by many things: ails, origins, racial traits, and a variety of other means. But the most common, by far, is darkness. It is always wise to keep an eye on the light, for if it fades, your situation shall grow darker and darker, almost ensuring that you fail on every action as things become more dire. This also counts the opposite way, creating characters that are crit fishers and are more RNG based rather than building towards modifiers. You try to hit crits. After accounting for advantages and disadvantages, you roll the remaining dice that are not guaranteed. For example, if you have 3 advantages, you roll the last contest dice. Lastly, gaining additional advantages and disadvantages can overwrite others. For example, if you have 2 disadvantages and 3 advantages, you would gain 2 odds and 2 positives, and 1 odd shall become even. The order of advantage versus disadvantage will actually change the outcome. So, within a light tale, it is advantage which is factored last, and within dark tales, disadvantage is factored last, often providing a more dire result. There is one final thing to cover regarding dice. 2 special dice exist to help players tilt the game in their favor. This mechanic became a massive favorite among some of my players, to the point of where they would explode with excitement whenever it was used. First, will dice. All will dice are not really dice so much as they are an extension of will, pushing yourself beyond limits to perform grand feats at a cost. With willed chance, you force rerolls on modifiers. With power of will, you gain a multiplier to your outgoing damage. With will at the gate, you can bounce back from death's door with no contest, and with impactful will, you can shatter the durable armors and barriers around you through sheer force. All of these shall deteriorate your daunted gauge, accruing points that build stress known as daunted levels. When this meter fills, your mind shall break, giving a litany of horrid negatives such as hysteria, phobias, cardiac arrest, and dread. Crippling effects that practically make your wayfarer useless and almost certain to die if they are left helpless in the middle of combat. But it is a potent thing that all players can use to turn the tide. I have seen archfiends, which are also basically bosses, killed in a single strike, or their health cleaved drastically by desperate players trying to sacrifice their own minds to save their friends. Always a valiant and explosive moment. The last dice is known as a charm dice, a probability manipulator that allows players to gain a critical success on demand for every charm dice they own. These are often rewarded at the end of session and carried over to the next session. Generally, I give them out to players who become deeply invested, wanting to give a recap, take notes, explore, interact deeply with the world, help me externally, etc. It is a meta currency to help players become more invested in the game. Players can only have a maximum of 3, and they decay after each following session. Only good for the next session after they are received. Some vocations or places of respite can gain more or accrue them by completing certain tasks, such as with a tithe at the church. While so many systems interact with dice and contests in vastly different ways, those are better left to separate videos. It does seem like a lot, but it really is seamless once it clicks. You now have the basics of dice and contests. And with that concludes this section of the Abyss. I shall see you in the future as we dive deeper.